this little section about all people are sinners. So this is the consequence. This is like a look at what power sin has on people. No one is righteous, not even one. No one is truly wise. No one seeking God. All have turned away. All have become useless. No one does good, not a single one. Their talk is foul like the stench from an open grave. Their tongues are filled with lies. Snake venom drips from their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. They rush to commit murder. Destruction and misery always follow them. They don't know where to find peace. They don't have fear of God at all. These things are references from the Old Testament, and they're talking about like a widespread kind of cultural thing. A lot of it is from Psalms, and like David's expressing his dilemma of everybody wants to kill him like all the time, and he's a good guy, and people are just in a really bad place. But that is where sin leads us. That is where that lack of faith in Christ leads us. In Romans 1, we see the origin of that being when people wouldn't worship God or even give him thanks, right? And they made up foolish ideas of what God is like. In some of the Psalms, both 14 and 53, in fact, it says, a fool says in his heart that God doesn't exist. Does that mean that they're saying with their lips that God doesn't exist? No, it doesn't. You can say that God exists with your lips and say it with your heart that he doesn't. And that's where we go back to that law of grace. It's figuring out exactly where you're coming from and taking a good, honest look at yourself and saying, do you believe what it is that's coming out of your mouth? It's a very important self-critique that happens because people can convince themselves on the surface of many, many things. So, the power of sin is death. Sin leads to death, right? The wages of sin is death. Did sin ever have the power to make us die permanently and be robbed of God? No. It doesn't have the power of death on that level. But what it does have is a finite power. Sin has the power over us of death. It doesn't have the power over God to separate God from us or whatever. But it does have the power over us to make us turn our backs on God and embrace death instead of his grace. Yeah, death is a finite threat over us. If you think about it, it's kind of a state of being threatened, you know? What do people obsess over in their lives? It's money and death, pretty much. And then there's relationship also, which is important. But that comes underneath death and usually money, you know? It's like when your life is threatened, push comes to shove, studies all around the world and circumstances all around the world say that people value their own life above others. Yes, you're snarling at me. There are good people in the world, and there are people that do bold things. But for the most part, people throw people under the bus, especially when you're coming from a place that does not rely on God's grace for your safety. This state of being threatened, this living under the philosophy of death, it's like it teaches us that we aren't provided for, right? Like that's what we're taught, that we have to provide for ourselves, so on and so forth. That's what, from the very beginning, the serpent in the garden was telling us, right? He's saying that Eve wasn't provided for. He's saying that you want something that God isn't willing to give you. And it's not going to have the effect that he says, don't worry about it. It's going to make you like him. That's why he doesn't want you to have it. You should have that. Take this. And people were tempted successfully by that. by wanting to provide for themselves, by not trusting that they were in a state of safety rather than a state of having to look out for themselves in all accounts like that. The original state of people was protection. It was a boundary under God, right? It was total safety. The Garden of Eden seemed like a pretty sweet place. There was work to be done there. There was all sorts of understanding and learning and hard work to be done. But it was a place of total safety, except the one boundary that God gave, the one solid boundary, which was what? Don't touch that fruit. Don't touch that fruit. Now, that makes it even safer. Don't eat the fruit, sorry. It was part of it. It was like, don't eat the fruit or even touch it later, right? In the discussion? What? Oh yeah, that was added. Right, but the commandment was don't eat the fruit. Yeah. So that was the state of things. That everything was safe except for this one thing. And that makes even more safe because you know that you have a wall to operate within. You know, you have a surety that this is safe, this is not safe. That's a really clear understanding of things. But after man made that mistake and ate that fruit, our fallen state was that everything was, for the most part, unsafe, not as regulated like that. It was up to us from then on. It was like the serpent said, your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. Now, before we had clear boundaries in terms of do this, don't do that. But the implication there is that we were coming from a place where basically all we'd ever been taught was good. Our Father was God. You know, we had a 100% clean legacy set up for success in every way. But after that, you know both good and evil. You have these choices to make. And you are sent out from this land of providence into this land of danger and hard work and so on and so forth because you weren't able to follow those rules. So we had safety and freedom under God versus the insecurity and danger under that self-protection that man chose. Man chose that he wanted to know good and evil and make those choices for himself and for herself. But yeah, that came with self-protection and self-discernment and a choice of heavy consequences and high stakes that went with those things. And that puts a lot of stress on people that we weren't necessarily intended on bearing from the beginning there. And because of that, there had to be a different kind of providence for us to be able to make that livable, right? We needed, from the start, right out the gate, we needed sacrifices to cope with that insecure moral choice that we made. What was the first sacrifice? What? Yeah, the animal for skins. Man couldn't cope with that choice that he'd made. He saw the difference between, shame and security, and to cover that shame, he needed an animal skin, and God was willing to sacrifice a part of his creation to provide that for them. But that wasn't his preference. And that's not our preference either. We don't want to have to do that. We want to be able to live under God's grace solely and be able to be in secure relationship with him like that. So there was just a lot of danger everywhere. Besides just that original sin, you go out and all of a sudden your eyes are open to all this. You have all these complex choices to make, and there's lots of danger everywhere. And lots of insecurity opportunities because of that. Insecurity and guilt. Is security unattainable in that? Do you think that in that state of having to make all of our own choices, and trying to learn good from evil and making the right choice in those, do you think security is unattainable? How do you get security in that? Where do you find that? You can try to rely on right choices. Are you going to make right choices all the time? No. And then you'll be insecure again. What do you think God's solution was? Christ, ultimately, right? From that moment, he set into this grand plan where at just the right moment and just the right time, Jesus came and did what he needed to do to provide us an inescapable, a comprehensive way for us to have that security, which we call grace right now. That grace is our security. That even if we do have little mess ups every now and then, we don't have to be insecure with God, and we don't have to put all these crazy sacrifices and rules and so on and so forth into our system so that we can just live. We can live a richer, fuller, freer life if we embrace that security in the grace that God's providing. And the way that Paul's framing that right now is in dying to sin. He says that we died with Christ through baptism, specifically, is like a picture of that. But the power of sin is death. When Christ died and was resurrected, he beat death. And through our faith and relationship with him, we also beat death. So if sin's power is death, then its legs are completely cut out under it, and we don't have to have insecurity over that anymore. We can live in a full-on secure environment that is still in this world, but not of the world, like it was in the garden. You know, the garden had a big bad world outside of it, but in that garden, that was a secure place that God had set up. Well, he just gave us a mobile command center in Christ. So we have ultimate security in that, all that we could ever want, if we believe that and trust that what God said and what God did is true. In some of those things that I cited in Romans 3 there, like the state of man under sin, it's interesting because buried within those Psalms are snippets and whole sections of hope even. And God has done that throughout history, that he has both the truth of sin and his grace and providence that are linked together in that. Like in Psalm 5, David was saying, Lord, lead me in your righteousness, or lead me to right living. Or in verse 11, he says, let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Like those things are passages of hope and his faith in that grace. You know what? Let's just turn there. Psalm 5. Let's do it. Let's get it. O Lord, hear me as I pray. Pay attention to my groaning. Listen to my cry for help, my King and my God, for I pray to no one but you. Listen to my voice in the morning, Lord. Each morning I bring my request to you and wait expectantly. O Lord, O God, you take no pleasure in wickedness. You can't tolerate the sins of the wicked. Therefore, the proud may not stand in your presence, for you hate all who do evil. You will destroy those who tell lies. The Lord detests murderers and deceivers. Because of your unfailing love, I can enter your house. I will worship at your temple with deepest awe. Lead me in the right path, O Lord, or my enemies will conquer me. Make my way plain for me to follow. My enemies cannot speak a truthful word. Their deepest desire is to destroy others. Their talk is foul, like a stench from an open grave. Their tongues are filled with flattery. O God, declare them guilty. Let them be caught in their own traps. Drive them away because of